correctly with the correct amount.
D20 Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com.
Welcome to Me and Steve Talk RPGs, a podcast where me and my friend Steve try and help you get the most out of your role-playing game experience.
Welcome back, folks, to Me and Steve Talk RPGs. I'm here with my friend Steve.
Hello, Steve.
And we're going to talk some RPGs. But before we do that, you're currently at Gamer Nation Con. Well, not currently as we speak, but currently in the future when this episode releases.
Well, so technically, this episode will release Tuesday morning.
Right.
Wednesday afternoon, I will be getting on a plane to head for Gamer Nation Con.
Oh, okay. You're flying. Okay. So you're flying down like right before the convention. So
yeah, convention starts Thursday.
Right. Why don't you tell the nice audience about Gamer Nation Con?
Gamer Nation Con is wonderful. Gamer Nation Con is 4 days of gaming goodness, to steal their own hashtag. But no, seriously, Gamer Nation Con, it's a little convention put on by the D20 Radio Network, you know, GM Chris, TG, GM Dave, etc. Hosted at this little place called Dallas Games Marathon, which is technically in Plano, Texas, but it's Dallas for everyone's purposes, right? It's just a celebration of gaming. It is wonderful.
It is, and I wish I could be there, but unfortunately, I'm just not going to be able to. And but we wanted to tell you folks about it. So if you're in the Dallas Plano area and you're listening to the podcast, you do still have a little bit of time to purchase those tickets.
Yep. Now, if you go on the tabletop.events site, which I'll throw a link in the show notes for it, most of the quote-unquote scheduled events are full. Here's the thing. That really doesn't matter. Because as long as you can find an empty space to play the game on, you can just pick up a game and play with whoever. And you still earn, if you go back and listen to the episode I did with GM Chris, I don't know, like a month and a half ago about Gamer Nation Con, you can still earn the points to spend on all the goodies at the Gamer Cred auction. You can, they still count the same as scheduled events, all that. And Dallas Games Marathon has a library of like 3,000 some odd board games that we get to use the whole time if you're into board games and such. So it's awesome. People running all kinds of stuff. Like I'm running 2 sessions of Tolkien-inspired Men in Black, 2 sessions of Tolkien-inspired Havoc Brigade. I'm playing in a session of the One Ring, the new-ish game from Free League.
Ooh, you heard it here first, folks. You get a Steve review of the One Ring.
Playing in a couple of sessions of Star Wars, and I'm playing in a game run by GM Brett, or our friend Brett Bowden, who is an honorary Steve.
Nice.
Of course, he's playing in one of the Men in Black games, so we'll see how all that goes. But like, there's literally lots of Genesis if you're into Genesis or Star Wars, a lot of that. All kinds of cool stuff. You go back and listen to the episode with Chris. I think they're going to have an artist in residence there this year, doing character portraits or whatever on site. Just it's like, we were both there last year, and I think, Steve, you could say it's a little bit hard to explain.
It is kind of a harder con to explain because it is a different convention than any other gaming convention. This is so tabletop focused. It's almost like you walked into the tabletop side of a gaming convention.
Right.
And you just hung out there. It's not, and there's, the guests will have like a panel where they talk about things, but it's all gaming. It's all scheduling. Well, not just scheduling, but just hopping in on pickup games. I know I had a couple spots that I needed people to just hop in on. So, but yeah, very cool.
Yeah, that is, what is that? April calendar. April 4th through the
7th?
7th, yes.
And then get out of Dallas because they're in the line of that solar eclipse.
Yeah, which did make for some scheduling challenges for certain things this year, but
happens.
Yep.
So we were talking before the podcast and sort of spitballing ideas around and actually came up with our topic for the week. I had said to you, sort of a hot take, mildly controversial opinion, that the next, like, after I read like one or two more generic systems, I'm about done with generic systems. As in, I'm about done with reading them. I'm about done with being interested in playing them. I want to go back to the really cool game specific systems, right? I'm ready to go back to this.
I mean, I hear you. I don't necessarily disagree in a way, right? I do tend to prefer more purpose designed systems. But one, I think we're very much in an age of you're seeing a lot more shared systems. You're seeing the community licenses or whatever
Well,
the
that's a little different than what I'm really driving at. I'm more so driving at, like, okay, I love Genesis to death, but I've played too much Genesis. And I want to get back to, and I get where the idea of these shared systems comes from, right? Like, oh, well, if we make one system, we can run 15 games off that one system. Plus we can have community support and mod support and all of that. That's great. That means that we don't have to write a new system for every game. And I understand that writing new systems for games is hard. I've not tried it yet. And I'm not talking on that to be like, oh, well, just do it. I'm more so saying that me personally would like to see more like old school style game specific systems, right? Like it's cool that the Year Zero engine exists, but I'm tired of Year Zero games, right? You know what I'm saying?
well, so
I'm not saying I'm tired of them, but I'm just like, it's like Savage Worlds. When something comes out for Savage Worlds, I'm like, hey, that's cool. It's coming to Savage Worlds. Not, hey, that's cool. It's got its own system. What? Like, I don't know.
well, like I think from a purely business perspective, the system tie-ins, like okay, you and I will just buy RPGs because we want RPGs because it's a pretty book because
Yeah, that
whatever.
cover looks nice. I'll take it.
But I think there are a lot of people, and okay, we also will buy a game because we think it's cool, and we tend to forget that we have a bunch of games at home
That we think
that we already think are cool, and that we still haven't been able to find anyone to actually get to play them with.
See, but that's another thing that I like about, I'm sorry, not to cut you off, but that's another thing I like about rules specific games. They're usually a book, right? Like it's one book, I can buy it, it's got the rules for everything. I got the system, I got the world. I don't need some of these like Savage Worlds or the Year Zero engine, or we're going to play Apocalypse. That type of stuff where it's like, okay, yeah, you can just get away with just this one book, but you should probably pick up the like core rules and also maybe the this rules and the that rules. You know what I'm driving at?
Yeah, no, I get that.
I like a solid, oh, hey, this is my copy of X. I really like it.
See, that's where though I think like we're also in an age where the quote unquote universal system doesn't mean what it used to.
No.
Like, last week I talked with Doug from Gaming Ballistic about a lot of his stuff that's, GURPS based or dungeon fantasy, which is driven by GURPS and etc. Well, GURPS is, I think it's fair to say GURPS is still of a simulationist design perspective. And I think in a way that both benefits and hurts a game as a quote unquote universal system, right?
Yeah,
because
it's hard to write a universal system that does simulation, whereas you want a universal system that does emulation. It does like close to what you want, just not as granular.
Right. But see, that to me. So GURPS and Genesis are both universal systems, right? But they're very, very different.
Right. Well, yeah.
GURPS is simulation, Genesis is emulation, but the thing with Genesis is also designed for heroic action movie tropes, effectively.
Right.
That's what it's for, which, if you think about it, that's a lot of what we do in gaming.
In
Not
the broader sense,
yes. But in the broad sense.
In the broader sense, yes. I understand that, like I said, I really like, there are generic systems that I like. I do like GURPS, even though it's mathy for me. I do like Genesis, and I do like, I'm not complaining about Savage Worlds or Year Zero Engine or Apocalypse. I'm just saying that if I read another 2 or 3 of those, I'm going to be about done with all of them, right? Like, I'm just saying that I'm like, we've reached market saturation in my mind. I have enough. Thank you.
See, I think Powered by the Apocalypse is kind of another category all on its own, though, right? Because at the core of Powered by the Apocalypse is a very, very simple dice resolution. You don't really have skills per se, or you got a couple of stats, but I think I see Powered by the Apocalypse as more of a structure than a system, if that makes sense.
In a way, I get where you're coming from when you say that. It still has, I don't know, in my mind, it still has rules. It still has guidelines on how to play that game. And so it's still a system. It's like, a system doesn't have to be complex to be a rule set or a system that a game's built in.
Right, but also specifically with Powered by the Apocalypse, because it's based on the moves and the playbooks that are written for each specific game, to me it's somewhere between a generic system and a focus system.
Yeah, in a way, the playbooks do narrow that down a lot, and it does kind of help that particular system not feel quite as open-ended, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
I think, I've talked about it in the past that I have a big problem with a lot of generic systems because they are so open-ended. Genesis is a great example. There's so much information that you could pull from so many different places to play that game that I feel almost lost when I'm trying to build a character. And it's not, I don't know if it's nobody's fault, right? Like, well, I just haven't read that many books, and it's also not asking me to do so. That's just me demanding something that the game's not necessarily requiring out of me. I just feel like, and this is my opinion, I always feel like building a Genesis character, like I'm building a character who could be better, but I just don't know where to look to find the answer to make them better.
So I feel like you're saying, and I suffer from this a bit too. It's, with the, if you want to call it ADHD, whatever, it's like there's too many little shiny bits and you can't pick out which ones you want.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's pretty much it. That's been my problem when I read Cortex, was there's too much going and I still don't quite get it. And I'd love to play that system. Maybe it'll help me wrap my brain around it, but yeah.
Yeah, look, I'm with you there. And but I mean, that's where I've said, that's where I think I understand why the Genesis Core rulebook does not use talent trees like Star Wars. I understand why they built the generic rules with the talent pyramid. However, and I think we talked about this a little bit when we had Brett on talking Anarchy and Dragon City, where they did go through and build talent trees. And I think building the talent trees, like Star Wars, like they did for Anarchy and Dragon City, that does focus that setting for that generic game much more. It eliminates some of the option paralysis.
Right. And at the same time, though, you can't, and this falls at the feet of the original Genesis creators. To get that more focused feel, you can't really put the onus on the writer or the GM to sit down and make talent trees for characters.
No, you can't. But at the same time,
I think they should have just split the difference and included general guidelines on how to make talent trees, and also here's this new system.
Fair. Yeah, there probably could have been, and there may be some there. I haven't dove that deeply into, my books there in that regard. It is, and Brett and Phil and whoever will tell you from working on that, hey, it's a lot of work to build out these talent trees. It takes a lot of testing and oh, is this gated weird and blah blah blah. So yeah, like, but see at that point, it see, this is where I think like it's not as clear cut as it used to be. Like back in the 90s, the early 2000s, when you had the GURPS and Palladium and a couple others, and everything else was its own system,
right?
Largely, because I think what you see, and Free League does this, right? Yes, it uses the same core engine, but they've done a lot of customizations to each version of it, and
that system is really interesting because even from game to game, you oftentimes, like, I sometimes have a hard time recognizing, oh, it's the Free League system, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's so interesting to see how they implement it between, like, Tales from the Loop is a crazy implementation of that system.
Mm-hmm.
Like, crazy.
It's the most basic version of it, really.
Well, it's stripped of all of its prim and circumstance. Like, it's stripped of everything.
Mm-hmm.
And you're looking at the bones of this thing going, oh, this is nice. What is this? And then you do a little bit of research and like, oh, why does it? Oh, so I don't know. I'm not saying I'm completely over generic systems, and I'm not saying they're bad. I feel like for me, I'm tired of seeing generic systems, and I miss the old days of, like, man, when Cyberpunk 2020 came out, it was that, and it sort of shared its system with Mechton Zeta, but Mechton Zeta was also arguably an expansion. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay. But I understand too, like the universal systems have their place, right? Because look, as gamers, we're creative people. We want to do the thing that we imagined, which is maybe kind of like the thing that somebody else did, but
yeah.
But it's not. And I kind of learned some things here, right? Because I mentioned, in the intro of the show, I'm running a couple of Lord of the Rings themed Havoc Brigade games at Gamer Nation Con. So to do this, I thought, okay, I could do it where you're basically playing orcs / goblins in Middle Earth, somewhere in slightly off camera segments from the movies. Yeah, we could do that, right? But let's face it, if we're going to play Lord of the Rings, people want to be Gimli, they want to be Legolas, they want to be Aragorn, or sort of. Maybe not literally,
Right.
And so Havoc Brigade, I mean, you've played it, as a player. I've seen, yes, it's got a system. It is absurdly broad, intentionally vague, and is really just prompts for hijinks, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, Havoc Brigade has a system?
Well, but technically it does, right?
Yeah, it does. No, I'm just joking.
Right. But I sat down and went, okay, so how can I make some characters that are, let's call it Fellowship of the Rings, The Hobbit inspired, but to have madcap, silly adventures. And for as simple as Havoc Brigade seems, and to be fair, Grant Howat, the author, wrote it to be a con one-shot. He included pre-gens. There are no rules for character creation. Not very many rules for anything, really, but, there are no rules for character creation. So I'm trying to figure out, okay, how do I make 6 characters that people can have fun with? And, okay, with the orcs, you have, again, the sheet that you had, there's a lot of play on being kind of big, dumb, and stupid.
Right.
Well, if you if you move that to playing even a caricature of the Fellowship of the Ring, that's not what they are. But you still want to retain that kind of zaniness, crazy, almost like some people out there may remember the DM of the Rings webcomic, which was, for anyone who's not seen it, gosh, it went, I forget. They put a lot of episodes of that out, if you will, but they basically took screen grabs from the movie and captioned them as if the characters were being played in an RPG. So Aragorn was forever trying to ditch this broken sword of his and, just assorted stuff like that. And so, in trying to sit down and figure out, okay, what talents or skills, whatever, what drives, what can I give these characters to, still tug/pay homage to, Middle Earth and Tolkien, but also incite shenanigans. And it was a lot harder than I expected it would be.
Right. Oh, I'm sure.
And so what I'm saying by that is, if you want to play a thing that's kind of like it, but not quite, even for a system or a game as simple as Havoc Brigade, there's a lot of work that goes into that with a generic system, be it Genesis, GURPS, whatever, the heavy lifting of that is already done. And so, like, I think they both have their place, even though I'm sure I've said it before on the show. I feel like specific systems, or setting specific systems, do tend to focus on the important things for that setting more than a generic system, but that's to be expected. But they struggle the further you get away from the core premise that they were designed for. Did that make sense?
Yeah, it made sense. I get where you're coming from. I'm trying to gather my thoughts. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
Any more thoughts on that train?
Well, no, I mean, I think, as much as I get where you're coming from to say that you're kind of tired of them, I feel like I actually kind of like and I don't have a lot of experience with them, so I can't point to specific things, but how Free League has gone to the customized version of the core system, I feel like that's got a lot of merit, because what that does too is, if you're, okay, let's say you played Mutant Year Zero, or you played Twilight 2000. Now you want to play Walking Dead. Well, you can tell your group, hey, you want to play Walking Dead? It's really close to Mutant Year Zero or Twilight 2000. Oh, okay, fine. Your players are more fluent in the language of the game, which means they can get more into the story. They can get more into what's happening in the game than trying to make sure they understand the math that's going, or the operations that are going on behind the game.
There's a term that gets thrown around in the tech communities called ecosystem. Ecosystem is the idea that I have an iPhone, therefore I have a MacBook, therefore I have a Mac PC or a Mac Pro, I have an iPad. I'm invested in this Mac environment. And that sort of applies there. What you're talking about is okay, we've played Mutant Year Zero, we've played Twilight 2000. You want to play Walking Dead? Well, it's in the same system, so you know what's going on there. It's the same ecosystem. And it's really, I think it's cool. I like that about Free League in particular. Yes, Mutant Year Zero exists as a standalone game. Do you need to have it to purchase every other version of this we've put out? No, not at all. Right. As a matter of fact, you can just buy Tales from the Loop, or you can just buy Twilight 2000, or you can and just grabbing those games off the shelf and them being ready to play and in the same system is fantastic. Now I don't have to, if I do have a new player, I don't have to sit down with them and be like, okay, well, but first you got to read this book and then you can read this book.
Mm-hmm.
I can just hand them the book we're playing and go, this will teach you everything you need to know.
True. See, I think that's where the Powered by the Apocalypse games kind of fall in. Each thing is kind of its own thing, but it's in that ecosystem, or like I was calling it before, structure. But
right.
Yeah,
I like that. I like here's the thing for this game. You don't have to worry. And especially for someone like me, I have a hard time remembering rules as it is. And we're constantly switching games. And the ability to just go, well, everything you need to know is in this book, even though we're playing, we're coming up on playing some more, we've talked about this, some more of that Powered by the Apocalypse. I know for a fact that I don't have to go back and read the original Powered by the Apocalypse book to refresh myself on the rules for that. I just have to wait to find out what books we're using to play with, and I can go read those and be like, oh, okay, this is how I play this game. And I know I don't. It's so nice to not have to. I don't know. In my opinion, I'm just over. I don't know how to put it. I'm over non-centralized universal gaming systems, right? Like,
am I hearing you say you want new but familiar, not the same thing with a different skin?
Well,
I know that seems.
It's yes, but also, also at the same time, I'm a big fan of game specific systems, but if you're gonna give me generics and say, oh well, we have this universal system that we use across all of our platforms, right? That's fine, but can you dress it up and make it look a little different? Like, I know you're putting flavor and flair into it, but it's the same stat block. You know what I mean?
Well, okay. Is it okay? Let's say you drive a Chevy pickup, right?
Right.
It's the difference between buying a GMC pickup or, say, a Ram. And I know that's not the greatest comparison, but it is in a way, right? Because I know for me, if I'm used to driving GM vehicles, they do all the controls almost exactly the same.
Yep.
You get into a Ford or a Dodge or a Honda or whatever, they're a little bit different. And maybe that's not even the same. Actually, I think that is kind of what I'm saying, right? Like, so Powered by the Apocalypse, it's more or less the same. You still have turn signals and windshield wipers and whatever, but the switches are in different places. Where if you go from a Chevy to a GMC,
that's what
the
I was
emblem
going to
on
say.
the steering wheel is different.
This one's a Chevy, this one's a Cadillac, this one's a Buick, right? Like, right. And they're all the same. It's all the same. It's the same car, basically.
And the emblem is different.
Yeah. Under the hood, it's still the same 4-cylinder Ecotec or whatever,
Right. And not saying, because game systems obviously tend to be more different than automobiles but the principle is there, I think.
Yeah, I think the principle's there. I think it's valid. I think it's valid to, not that we're demanding a whole lot more, but it's nice to have some change.
Yeah.
And even just redressing things makes such a difference. We've talked about this sorry, I'm not trying to talk over you, but we've talked about this in episodes where we talked about Beg, Borrow, and Steal. Redress stuff, make it look better, please. Take the extra time. That's one of my biggest pet peeves is a lot of these generic systems just don't want to take the effort they don't want to put the effort in. Like, I give Brett a lot of credit for what they did with Anarchy and Dragon City and that entire team. The entire Studio 404 team did an awesome job with that. And you can tell they put an amazing amount of effort into redressing Genesis in a lot of ways. There's a lot of things that come out from even official publishers that aren't remotely trying to redress things in any sort of way. Right? They're trying to hand you. It is very much like trying to give you a GMC with a Chevy. Trim level is like, okay, this was plastic and this is plastic. The only difference is that this plastic was blue and this plastic is black, right? So I don't know. That's my biggest thing is that, like, I just want a little bit more effort when it comes to, like, oh, we're releasing a supplement. Oh, cool. What's that supplement about? It's about this. And how does it change the system in any way? Or how does it redress the system to add flavor? And we're getting away from that in a lot of things, and it's boring, and I'm sorry.
Well, but like, okay, look, my Palladium collection, right? They just pumped out book after book of new gear, new classes, new monsters, whatever. But it was just more Legos.
Right.
And I don't know if that.
Well, but I mean, that's a little bit better than, I don't know. And I don't even have an exact, like, target for this criticism, but I know I've read a couple like things based off generic systems that just put no effort into trying to dress up the system.
Well, but see, okay, so that's an avenue we can run down a little bit, right? How much of this, and well, I think you want to call them community content programs or the open license movement, whatever, is good for gaming as a whole because, rising tide lifts all boats, etc. I think what it also has done to a point is open things up to where you have people who put out something that they think is really cool. And it may be very, very fun for them and their group to play at their table. However, and I know I'm not going to name it because part of me doesn't remember the title exactly, but we had a game come up on Game of the Week one time, and it sounded really awesome. And so I bought it, and I read it, and I went, oh my God, the concept is really, really cool. But what I bought is a GM's notebook, not a game book.
Right.
And what I mean by that, right? Like there was stuff I legitimately could not find in that book that I felt like I needed to run that game, to play that game, that I'm sure the guy who wrote it knew off the top of his head.
Right.
But
right.
There's a difference between being even a great GM and a great world builder and a great game customizer in that whatever. There's a difference between being a game designer and a writer. And maybe that's something I should find someone, a guest to come talk about, because like I feel like there were a lot of really cool things in the design of that game that we're talking about, but it wasn't written in a way that converted it well to a game for someone else to be able to pick up. And I think with the community content programs and just the general ease of digital publishing at this point and self-publishing and getting something out there are products out there that, and to call them subpar, I think is unfair in a way, but they just haven't been edited and developed sufficiently enough, probably because the creator simply didn't know that they needed those steps.
Yeah.
You get what I'm driving at?
I get what you're driving at. I don't think it's, I get what you're driving at. I feel like sometimes we, there's a lot of things, okay, where you get excited and your friends get excited. And so you do a thing and you put it out on the internet and you don't realize how involved it actually needs to be. Right. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that that's what happened here. I don't know the exact case. Like, honestly, couldn't bring to mind a game in the recent past that you're talking about.
This was like a year ago or better.
Right, exactly. But I know from me being a kid and being excited about things, I've definitely like, oh man, we're gonna make a movie, and it was way more work than any of us realized, right? Like,
let's make a podcast. It can't be that hard.
Oh yeah, it can't be that hard. We'll just sit down with a couple microphones. It won't mean like nothing in the end of the day. Meanwhile, you're learning all this editing software and bringing in knowledge of audio equipment from past jobs, and anyways, I love doing this podcast. By the way, I don't want anybody to think I'm like, podcast sucks. No, I love doing this podcast, but it's a lot of work.
At times it is, yeah. I mean, it's fun, but like it's one of those things where, and it's funny, especially you get to like Gamer Nation Con, whatever, and the other, podcast hosts are there. And sometimes you'll have these conversations about, man, if someone had told me how much work this was going to be, I probably wouldn't have done it. But it's fun and I don't want to stop.
Right. If I'd have never gotten started, I'd have never gotten started. But now that I'm started, I'm not stopping anytime soon.
Right. Like, but like, and so I think too, to go back to what I was talking about with these games that if you want to call them unfinished, I think that can also put a bad taste in people's mouth because you see it as it's published or it's professional. Well,
Right.
not so much anymore necessarily, right? Like anybody can make a CD at this point, right? That doesn't mean it's a professionally produced album. Doesn't mean they can play, but I mean, that's a whole nother, rabbit trail to go down, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. Well, before we end up down another rabbit hole, why don't we move into game of the week? But before we move into game of the week, there's a little bit of business I want to attend to just to talk about at this point in the show.
Okay.
You know what's going on. Our friend and yours, Alex Kinnaman, who's been on the podcast, I think
Twice.
Once
as Alex, the game shop owner, and once as part of the team behind Pittsburgh Gaming Expo.
Right. He runs a shop out of Pittsburgh called Retrograde. It's a really fantastic shop out of Monroeville. And he's run on some hard times. And we put up a GoFundMe. Basically, he's losing his spot and needs a little bit of help finding a new one and getting to another spot and getting to another location after having fought so hard for this one. Mm-hmm. And so I just wanted to shout it out on the podcast. There will be a link. I'm sure you can include a link in the description.
Oh, yeah.
Right? There will be a link in the description.
Currently, I put one I think it's in the self-promotion channel of our Discord. Right. But yeah, long story, incredibly short. He's just had problems with the building and the property management / landlord setup. And you can, check it all out on the GoFundMe. He explains it to some extent. But basically, his lease they're electing not to let him renew his lease.
And so, we just want to, because he's a good guy, we want to shout him out and try and get him some help. Also, I noticed that you had posted up about in the green room when I think you spoke with Doug about Owen Casey Stevens, the Rad Bundle.
Mm-hmm.
Is that
that was my game of the week last week. I think it's still active. Where is Linky? Yeah, it's still coming up.
Okay, good. So Owen Casey Stevens, I'm sure you talked about this, has been going through it as well, and there's a bundle up that'll really help him out.
Mm-hmm.
Go buy that if you can.
Yeah, it's $1,200 worth of books for $30,
and it helps a good dude.
Yep.
So, with all that being said, let's go ahead and move into game of the week.
Woohoo! Game of the week.
Game of the week. Game of the week.
All right, you or me?
I'll go.
You'll go. All right, you go.
I have a game called It's Not an Owl.
Okay, what is it then?
I'm not 100% sure. So it is, and I'm just going to throw this up in the green room. It is a self-guided adventure. So, guided by the wisdom of the tarot cards, players will explore fragmented memories, delve into depths of unknown, and uncover hidden truths about their encounters with unworldly beings. So it says through a series of bi-weekly gameplay sessions, players will draw tarot cards to trigger memory recall. So it sounds like it's almost a GM-less, tarot card-led, cosmic horror type thing.
Yeah, I get that kind of vibe. Yeah, the description isn't real rich, but it sounds interesting.
Like, I don't know, there's something interesting to me about like games run by a deck of cards or games run by, like in this case, tarot cards, where, and especially in this one where you're trying to piece together a story out of it. I think that's really interesting, and I really definitely want to get my hands on this. It's all of $3. So I'm going to pick that up tonight, but I want to play it. I'm going to set it down in front of some friends of mine that I think would really enjoy this. And, a couple bi-weekly sessions and we'll have it.
No, that sounds cool. So It's Not an Owl.
Yeah. And that is by RAR I Am a Monster Publishing.
Aha. So I am going with one that I kind of stumbled across today. And I don't know, I don't think this has ever been brought up before. But the publisher is The Gauntlet, which I do remember seeing before. So I don't know. But what I picked out this week is a game called The Silt Versus role-playing game. And that's versus as in like poetry or verses in the Bible or whatever, right? Not versus as in against. So this is actually, amusingly enough, it's based and powered by the apocalypse, but this is a game. Now it's also based on, apparently there is a award-winning audio drama of this name as well. It describes itself as a game of folk horror and monstrous divinity. It's based on Brindlewood Bay and the Between, as well as Apocalypse World. So in this game, you play what they're calling custodians, which are employees of the Bureau for the Investigation and Assimilation of Stray Deities. In a world of 10,000 gods, your job is to track down the forgotten and stray deities causing trouble in the community and deal with them. What exactly that means depends on the situation. But either way, you're a pawn in an uncaring system and will eventually be the target of a conspiracy that will try to use your work for its own nefarious purposes. You know, it comes with 6 faiths that that a player character has to choose to follow a faith. I'm assuming this is kind of like the playbooks, right? It goes into a little bit of detail about those. Also has some sample assignments, right? Like the missions or the stray god that you have to go track down and find out about and deal with. I think the concept sounds really, really cool.
Yeah, I think it sounds like a really neat game. I'm very interested in that.
And so, but part of, I think, where the name comes from is, and if, for those of you familiar with the Powered by the Apocalypse system, right, you have basically 3 categories of die roll, right? You have failure, you have a partial success, or usually success with a cost, or true success. Well, one of the mechanics in this game is, let's say you roll a failure. GM, or actually I think they're calling them the keeper in this, but anyway, describes what happens. If you as a player want to then change that, you can elect to write a verse, just a little snippet, whatever, that re-explains what happened, moving it up a success category.
That's cool.
Yeah, so like it's not gonna be your beer and pretzels game, I don't think, but it sounds like a really interesting narrative, creative endeavor.
Yeah, it definitely does. Well, that's really, really neat. And again, that is the Silt Versus.
Yep. And what does that cost? I didn't even look at that. PDF is $18, but it's 160 some pages, so it's not exactly small.
Yeah, it's worth the price. But with all that being said, we want to thank everyone for listening. Just as a heads up, there will be no episode next week. So that will be the week of April the something. April the 9th
or 10th.
There will not be an episode just due to you being gone this week at the con and me being on vacation. So with all that being said, we want to thank everyone for listening. Remind you that Discord exists, Patreon exists. Give us a like, follow on any of your podcasting apps. If you can give us a review, leave us a review. If you can give us some stars, give us some stars. It helps get us out there to other people.
Share an episode that you really like on your social media or Discord server or
just
wherever.
Send it to somebody.
Don't just cold random message people though. That's not cool.
Go ahead. It's fine. Who cares? Out of the blue. Hey, we've never met before, but listen to this podcast. All right. Thanks. Bye.
Yeah, that could be a little creepy.
Yeah. But with all that being said, we want to remind everyone to be kind to one another and get out there and play some RPGs.
Yep. Take care, y'all.
Intro and outro music by the band 12 Noon. You can email us at meandsteverpg@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter and RPGs. Find us on Facebook at Me and Steve RPG Podcast. On Discord at Me and Steve RPGs. And as always, all of these links are in the show notes. Thank you, and be kind to one another.
How much for the cigar?
Cigar, $20, dog. You gotta go down the street to the store and buy that.